Hello. I want to talk a bit about the Justice Secretary, David Gauke. He has been Justice Secretary under the May administration now for, I believe, I don't know if it's the full duration of her premiership, but I think he was one of the original cabinet appointees. So in the UK, Justice Secretary, if you're from outside the UK, is it's not one of the four great offices of state, but it is a fairly senior ministerial position. I would say roughly equal to health education. It's a pretty important position because the Justice Secretary has a big influence in determining. I mean, he or she certainly doesn't do it alone, but they have a big influence in determining issues of sentencing and the narrative that the party takes around that. Now, I've never been a conservative. There's too many areas I disagree with the Conservatives on. But one thing I'd always thought that the Tories were better on than other parties was on crime. I always felt that even if their implementation wasn't always the best, they at least had their mindset in the right place. They at least recognized the need for justice, much more so than Labour or the Liberal Democrats or any other party, except maybe UKIP, but certainly more than any other major party. Um, so I I would expect the Conservative Justice Secretary to kind of be sympathetic to victims of crime. Well, I would expect that of any Justice Secretary, but particularly a Conservative one. But time and time again, David Gauke has made public statements and advocated positions that are clearly liberal and, in my opinion, just plain wrong. A few weeks ago, he suggested that women shouldn't go to jail because they are women. Now, this sort of sexist double standards is nonsense. The vast majority of inmates in this country are men anyway, but women who commit serious offences, and I was going to say violent offences, but just because a crime doesn't involve violence doesn't mean it's trivial. You could have someone who robs a pensioner of their life savings. That's a devastating, life changing crime. It might not necessarily involve violence. So, women who commit these sort of offences, the idea that they should get special treatment solely because they're women, I think is plain wrong. More recently, he has come out and said that drug addicts and alcoholics should not be sent to prison, they should get treatment. Well, I've nothing against treatment as a principle. Clearly, these people do need treatment. But if they have committed a violent offence to fuel their habit, which is often the case, then why the hell should they escape justice? Why the hell should they not be held accountable for that action? I don't accept the argument, oh, they're not responsible for their actions because they're high or they're drunk. They made the decision to get onto drugs. They made the decision to, well, alcoholism is a disease, but ultimately there has to be some accountability, there has to be some responsibility. And if you're saying that if someone is an alcoholic or a drug addict, then they commit a violent offense, they attack an innocent person to mug them to get money for their drug habit. Um, what they're not responsible for it. That is a slap in the face to the victim, and I think it's disgraceful. Gauck also says that prison is retribution. This is a typical liberal argument, and it's complete nonsense. Retribution would be doing exactly the same thing to the criminal as they do to the victim. I always say this in these sort of videos. I totally understand the need for penal reforms. I totally understand the need in in many cases for rehabilitation. Not every case. I think some crimes are so heinous they can't be rehabilitated, but there has to be justice. And here, a Justice Secretary speaking such extreme liberal terms is infuriating. I mean, does this guy have any comprehension of the views of victims of crime? Does he? I am yet to see him. Maybe he has, but I haven't seen it actually publicly say offenders need to be held to account. I mean, this is a guy who is clearly taking very liberal positions on justice. I find that very disturbing when we are seeing rising violent crime in this country, people want reassurance that criminals are going to be held to account. And with this Justice Secretary, we aren't seeing it. David Gauke, you're a disgrace. You're a disgrace because you will not recognise, you will not show any sort of sense that offenders need to face justice. And, it's a rather despairing thought that if a Tory Justice Secretary comes out with these positions, then what hope is there? And just as a general point, you know, one thing about democracy is that people must feel empowered. And it's not easy being a politician in a country like the UK where you're constantly criticised. I get that. And I have actually advocated that people be more understanding of the positions politicians are in. They can't please everyone all the time. I get that. But I also strongly believe that they have to be open to critique. And recently, we've seen a situation whereby, and I don't want to totally change the subject, but it is relevant, where MPs have been discussing, for example, making trolling of MPs a criminal offence. Well, what is trolling and what is legitimate criticism? That's an important question because I, for example, feel very angry about David Gauke's position. Now, surely, as a member of the public, as someone who did experience serious crime, I have a right to question him because he has an influence on policy. I don't have a right to threaten him. I don't have a right to, harass him in the sense of sending message after message after message. But I do think I have a right to, for example, send him an email, send his office an email demanding to know why he's coming out with these positions. It's not that I'm important, it's that I'm just another member of the public. And it can be a very, very frustrating thing feeling powerless. And I do feel, I mean, this guy is Justice Secretary. So what he is taking away empowerment from victims of crime with coming out of with these sort of positions. That makes my blood boil, to be quite honest. Ministers have to be accountable to the people they're meant to be representing. So in the case of the Justice Secretary, he is meant to be answerable to victims of crime. So far, all he has done is advocated the people who terrorise them, and that infuriates me. David Gauke needs to live in the real world. He needs to be in the shoes of people who are going through the torment of those he is defending. I mean, this guy is speaking like he's a liberal or a member of the Green Party. What the hell? He's meant to be a conservative. I'm sure there'll be other people who pick out areas maybe where he is more conservative, but what I've seen so far is extremely liberal positions. And when it comes to crime, no, I do have a black and white view on this. I believe in justice, period. Full stop. And to see a so called justice secretary basically advocate criminals over the victims, it's disgusting. And it is a sense of, well, what can you do about it? And unfortunately, there isn't really much you can do. I could say I think he should resign. I can say this, that, and the other, but it's all about empowerment. And I really think that the public have a right to criticize politicians or hold them to account. So people have a right to criticize Boris Johnson on his Burqa comments. I happen to agree with Boris Johnson, but again, this is all about empowerment. The public have to have the ability to criticize politicians, and because they're in a position of power, I think it should be a case of um, giving people the empowerment to say we can make you resign if there's enough petitions, if there's enough. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, David Gauke, this guy's meant to be Justice Secretary, and his anti-prison positions are, in my opinion, just wrong. I wonder how many victims of crime this guy's actually met. Maybe he has, but I suspect the vast majority of victims of crime Okay, they might favor drug addicts and alcoholics getting treatment. I understand that. I'm not against that. What I'm saying is if they commit violence, the idea that they shouldn't face justice and they shouldn't be treated like an offender is absurd. And it infuriates me that the so-called Justice Secretary is in a position of power and he's using it to defend criminals. Shame on you, David Gauke.